What is the true cost of underestimating someone? For Conrad Harrington, a man who measured the world in dollars and cents, the answer was nearly $1 billion. He walked into Trattoria Valeriano, expecting nothing more than an overpriced meal and obsequious service. He saw a waitress, a nameless face in a sea of service staff, and saw someone insignificant. He demanded she speak a language she was already using simply to exert his power. He never imagined that this quiet young woman, polishing wine glasses in the corner, held the keys to 5 different languages and the power to either salvage his empire or watch it burn. Her reply would not just echo through the gilded restaurant. It would shatter his entire worldview. The scent of garlic, rosemary, and old money clung to the velvet curtains of Trattoria Valeriano. It was a Tuesday night, but for the clientele of this particular establishment, the day of the week was an irrelevant detail. Here time was measured not in hours, but in the popping of champagne corks and the signing of contracts worth more than the entire city block. Annalise Reed moved through this world like a ghost, her presence felt only in the silent refilling of a water glass or the discreet placement of a bread basket. Her black uniform was immaculate, a stark contrast to her tiny 5th-floor walk-up apartment where the paint was peeling and the radiator hissed like a cornered snake. For 8 hours a day, she was part of the exquisite scenery. She learned to read the patrons with the same intensity she once applied to German existentialist philosophy. A twitch of a jaw meant the steak was overcooked. A furtive glance at a phone meant a deal was going south. A lingering touch of hands across a table meant an affair was either beginning or ending. Annalise saw it all, filed it away, and said nothing. Her silence was her shield and her currency. Tonight the air was different. It was charged with the kind of oppressive energy that precedes a thunderstorm. The source was table 7, nestled in the most private alcove. It was the domain of Conrad Harrington. Harrington wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan, a man whose company, Harrington Dynamics, had its tendrils in everything from aerospace engineering to quantum computing. His face, a chiseled mask of permanent dissatisfaction, was a regular feature in business magazines. He had a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and possessing a temper that could curdle milk from across a room. He was flanked by 2 associates. On his right was Robert Vance, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed to allow for more efficient sycophancy. On his left sat Geneviève Dubois, sharp, intelligent, and perpetually tense in Harrington's presence. They were speaking in low, urgent tones, a mix of English and clipped formal German. Annalise had been assigned the table, a task most of the staff dreaded. She approached with the practiced calm of a bomb disposal expert. "Good evening," she said, her voice soft but clear. "May I start you with something to drink?" Harrington didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that said, "Less than nothing." "Water." "Still." "No ice." Robert, ever the echo, nodded vigorously. "The same." Geneviève offered a tight, apologetic smile. "Sparkling for me, please. With lemon." Annalise nodded and retreated. As she prepared the drinks at the service station, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were discussing a deal, a high-stakes merger with a German conglomerate, Voss Kruger. The deal was on life support. "The board is spooked," Geneviève was saying in German, her accent precise, learned in a Swiss boarding school. "They feel you are being too aggressive. Herr Schmidt is traditional. He sees this as a hostile takeover, not a partnership. Schmidt is a dinosaur." Harrington spat back in English, his voice a low growl. "He's sitting on revolutionary technology he doesn't know how to monetize. I'm not here to hold his hand. I'm here to take his company into the 21st century." "But Conrad, perception is everything," Robert chimed in his German, clumsy and heavily accented. If we cannot make them feel comfortable, then we find leverage and force their hand, Harrington interrupted, his tone final. Annalise returned with the water. She placed each glass down with a steady hand, her movements economical and silent. As she set down Harrington's glass, her sleeve brushed against a stack of documents he had placed precariously close to the edge of the table. A single sheet filled with dense financial projections slid off and fluttered to the floor. She bent to retrieve it instantly, her apology already on her lips. "My apologies, sir." Harrington's eyes, the color of chips of ice, finally landed on her. It was not a look of acknowledgement, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He snatched the paper from her hand, his knuckles brushing her fingers. The contact was cold, impersonal. "Watch what you're doing," he snapped. "Of course, sir. I'm very sorry," she said, her gaze respectfully lowered. He scanned the page, then threw it back on the table. He looked back at his associates. Then his eyes flicked back to Annalise, who was waiting to take their food order. A cruel, dismissive smirk played on his lips. He had found a target for the evening's frustrations. He leaned back in his chair, a king surveying a particularly uninteresting peasant. He noticed her name tag for the first time, not to learn her name, but to confirm she had one. Annalise. It meant nothing. "Are you new here?" he asked, though he didn't care about the answer. "Your accent is... Where are you from?" It was a loaded question. Annalise's accent was a clean, unplaceable American standard, honed by years of practice to be as neutral as possible. "I'm from here, sir. New York." Harrington's smirk widened. He was enjoying this. He gestured around the restaurant at the Italian names on the menu, the faint sound of an aria playing over the speakers. "This is an Italian restaurant," he stated, as if instructing a child. "The staff, they usually have a little authenticity, a little flavor." He looked at Robert, who chuckled on cue. Annalise remained perfectly still. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" "Yes," Harrington said, leaning forward. His voice dropped, becoming sharp and commanding. "You can stop with the charade." He gestured between his two associates. "We're having a multicultural business discussion here. It's a globalized world. Surely you can manage." Annalise's brow furrowed slightly. "Sir." His patience, a notoriously finite resource, snapped. He slammed his palm flat on the table, not loud enough to cause a scene, but forceful enough to make the silverware jump. Genevieve flinched. "Don't play dumb with me." He snarled, his voice a venomous whisper. "I'm a paying customer. I am your employer for the next 2 hours. I've had a long day dealing with obstinate foreigners, and I will not be pandered to by a waitress putting on an accent." Annalise stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing. Putting on an accent, he thought her native English was a performance. The sheer arrogance of the assumption was breathtaking. "Sir, I assure you this is how I speak," she said, her voice remaining level, a testament to years of practiced self-control. "Enough," Harrington commanded. "I want to be understood. I want to be comfortable. Drop the act. Speak English." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Robert snickered into his napkin. Genevieve stared at her plate, a flush of embarrassment creeping up her neck. Annalise felt a familiar hot surge of anger, an emotion she always kept carefully banked and hidden. She had been invisible, she had been dismissed, but this was different. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate, to strip away her identity and replace it with one of his own choosing. She looked at this powerful, broken man, a man who saw the world not as a tapestry of cultures, but as a collection of assets to be acquired. He demanded English. Very well. He would get far more than he bargained for. A slow, cold calm washed over her. The ghost was about to speak. A profound stillness settled over table 7. Anneliese did not flinch, did not recoil. Instead, she held Conrad Harrington's icy gaze for a beat longer than a waitress was supposed to. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of the deferential servant dissolved, replaced by something far more formidable. Her posture straightened, not in defiance, but with the quiet confidence of someone about to take control. She turned her head slightly, her eyes moving from Harrington to Geneviève Dubois. The shift was subtle, but it was a clear transfer of power. She was no longer addressing the table. She was addressing its individual components. She began to speak, and the voice that emerged was not her usual soft service industry tone. It was fluid, crisp, and resonant, with an authority that stunned the table into silence, and it was in perfect Parisian French. Madame Dubois, if I may, your concern regarding Herr Schmidt's perception is entirely correct. A man who has built his company on decades of tradition will not see disruption as an opportunity, but as a personal insult. Your intuition is your greatest asset in this negotiation. Genevieve's head snapped up, her eyes wide with astonishment. Her own French was excellent, but this was the effortless fluency of a native speaker, tinged with an academic precision she hadn't heard since her university days at the Sorbonne. Before anyone could react, Anneliese's gaze shifted to Robert Vance, who was staring at her, his mouth slightly agape. Her expression remained impassive, but the language changed again, flowing into flawless, formal High German. And Mr. Vance, your concern for the board's comfort is understandable, but your translation of aggressive as aggressive is perhaps too direct. The German word carries a more hostile connotation. Perhaps ambitious or determined would have been more diplomatic. Nuance is crucial in these matters. Robert's face went from pale to beet red. She had not only understood their entire conversation, she had pinpointed the exact subtle linguistic error he had made moments earlier, a mistake that could indeed be misinterpreted by a sensitive negotiating partner like Herr Schmidt. He felt suddenly naked, his incompetence laid bare by the waitress. Finally, Anneliese turned her eyes back to Conrad Harrington. He was frozen, his hand still flat on the table, his expression a mixture of shock, fury, and utter disbelief. The smirk was gone, replaced by a rigid mask of confusion. Anneliese seamlessly transitioned again this time into a sharp, articulate Spanish, the kind spoken in the boardrooms of Madrid, not on the streets. Mr. Harrington, you speak of a globalized world. However, it seems your vision of globalization is one where everyone adapts to you. You demand leverage to force a deal, but the most powerful leverage isn't capital, it's understanding. Something you with all your power seem to lack completely. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The silence in the alcove was now so absolute it felt like a physical presence. The distant clatter of the kitchen and the murmur of other diners seemed to be happening in another universe. Then Anneliese did something that sealed her victory. She reverted to perfect, unaccented English, the very language he had accused her of faking. Her voice was calm, measured, and devastatingly clear. You demanded I speak English, Mr. Harrington. I am a native English speaker. I also hold a dual major in international relations and Germanic languages from Georgetown University, which I was forced to leave a semester short of graduation due to overwhelming family medical debt. The French I learned from my late mother, who was a translator for the UN. The Spanish I picked up living in a diverse community and perfected through immersion programs. I am not putting on an accent. I am simply trying to pay my rent by serving you overpriced pasta. She took a small breath. Now, as for your Voss-Kruger problem, you are approaching it all wrong. You see Herr Schmidt as an obstacle. You need to see him as a partner. You are trying to buy his company, but what you should be buying is his legacy. Frame the merger not as an acquisition, but as the only way to ensure the Schmidt name and his technology dominate the global market for the next 50 years. Appeal to his pride, not his wallet. He is an old-world German industrialist, not a Silicon Valley startup founder. She stood there, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She had not raised her voice. She had not insulted him directly. She had simply taken his arrogance, his prejudice, and his business problem, and dismantled all three with a quiet, surgical precision. Robert Vance looked like he had seen a ghost. Genevieve Dubois was staring at Annalise with a look of dawning, unadulterated awe. And Conrad Harrington. He looked as if the floor had just dropped out from under him. He had built an empire on his ability to read people, to find their weaknesses and exploit them. Yet this waitress, this person he had deemed less than insignificant, had read him his team and his billion-dollar problem in less than 10 minutes. He was speechless. For the first time in perhaps 2 decades, Conrad Harrington, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, had absolutely no idea what to say. The silence stretched thick with humiliation and shock. The power dynamic at Table 7 had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. And the person holding all the cards was the one holding a notepad, waiting to take their order. The echo of Annalise's words faded, but the shockwaves remained rippling across the small alcove. The manager, a perpetually flustered Frenchman, named Mr. Dubois, had been hovering nearby, sensing the tension. He had seen Harrington's anger and was preparing to placate a powerful customer, likely at Annalise's expense. But when he heard her fluent, intricate French, he stopped dead in his tracks. He understood only a fraction of what followed, but he understood the shift in tone. He was no longer witnessing a complaint. He was witnessing an execution. He scurried over his face, a mask of professional panic. "Is everything all right here, Mr. Harrington? Is there a problem with the service?" Harrington didn't respond. He was still staring at Annalise, his mind working furiously, trying to recalibrate a world that no longer made sense. He saw her now, truly saw her for the first time. The cheap uniform, the tired look in her eyes, it was all still there, but it was now just a frame around a portrait of staggering, unexpected brilliance. His humiliation was a physical thing, a hot coil in his gut. But beneath it, a different feeling was stirring intrigue, cold, hard, pragmatic intrigue. Annalise, her point made, reverted to her role. "Everything is fine, Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice, once again quiet and deferential. She turned to Harrington. "Are you ready to order, sir? Or would you like a few more moments?" The sheer audacity of her calm professionalism was another blow. She had just intellectually disemboweled him and was now asking if he wanted the lasagna. Harrington finally found his voice. It was hoarse. "Get out!" He said the words directed at Mr. Dubois. "All of you. I need to speak with her. Alone." Mr. Dubois looked from Harrington to Annalise, his confusion palpable. Robert and Genevieve, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere, rose immediately. Genevieve gave Annalise a quick, searching look, a look of profound respect, before following Robert out of the alcove. Now it was just the two of them, the billionaire and the waitress. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a negotiating silence. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a raw, grudging curiosity. "Annalise Reed, Georgetown." He stated not as a question, but as if processing a data point. "What happened?" "Life." Annalise replied, her answer a stone wall. She would give him no sob story, no vulnerability to exploit. "My mother passed away. There were bills, the kind that don't wait for a graduation. Harrington nodded slowly, his gaze intense. He was a man who understood leverage, and he had just been handed a piece of it. Not her debt, but her untapped potential. It was a resource like an undiscovered lithium deposit. "The Voss-Kruger deal," he said, cutting straight to the point. "The analysis you just gave, that wasn't a guess." "It was an observation," she corrected him. "You spoke of his traditionalism. Your associate mentioned his board was spooked. You called him a dinosaur. Dinosaurs don't like meteors. They like a stable climate. You are presenting yourself as a meteor." Harrington leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He was no longer a customer talking to a waitress. He was a recruiter headhunting a target. "The deal is tomorrow, 9 a.m. My team and I are meeting with Herr Schmidt and his people at our headquarters. My lead translator is competent, but he's a technician. He translates words. He doesn't translate meaning or intent. You do." Annalise remained silent, her expression unreadable. "I have an offer for you, Ms. Reed," he said, the use of her formal name a clear concession. "Work for me for the next 24 hours. Come to the meeting tomorrow. Be my ears. Tell me what they're really saying. Tell me what I'm missing." The offer was absurd, a fantasy, but Annalise's mind was already calculating. She was exhausted by her life, by the constant struggle, the soul-crushing routine of serving people who looked right through her. This was a door cracked open by a moment of anger-fueled audacity. "You want to hire a waitress to help you close a billion-dollar merger?" she asked, a hint of incredulity in her voice. "I want to hire the mind that just put me my Stanford-educated lawyer and my Wharton MBA in our place," he retorted bluntly. "I don't care if you're serving coffee or running a hedge fund. I recognize talent when I see it, and right now I need it." He was testing her. He expected her to be grateful to jump at the chance. She saw the calculation in his eyes. So she made a calculation of her own. "What are you offering?" she asked, her tone as cool and professional as if they were discussing the wine list. A flicker of a smile, the first genuine one Annalise had seen, touched Harrington's lips. He respected that. It was a language he understood. $10,000, he said, expecting to shock her. For the day. Annalise didn't blink. $10,000 would solve a lot of her problems. It would cover 3 months' rent, pay off a chunk of her credit card debt. But she knew her worth in this moment was far greater than that. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. He had humiliated her. The price for her help had to reflect the depth of that insult. "No," she said simply. Harrington's eyebrows shot up. "No, my current job, Mr. Harrington, offers me a degree of stability and, believe it or not, dignity. I will not quit my job for a one-day gig, and I will not be bought cheaply after being so casually disrespected." She looked him straight in the eye. "You want my expertise for 24 hours. You will pay off the entirety of my outstanding student and medical debt. The total is $87,450. You will have the funds transferred to my account by 8 a.m. In return, I will give you my undivided attention until the meeting is concluded." Harrington stared at her, genuinely taken aback. He was used to people cowering before him, not coolly negotiating their price. $87,000 was nothing to him, a rounding error. But the principle of it, the sheer nerve, was astounding. He felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years, respect. "And if I refuse," he challenged, "then I will ask you if you'd like to hear the dinner specials," Annalise replied without missing a beat. "The sea bass is excellent tonight." The silence stretched again. Conrad Harrington, a man who had negotiated with heads of state and corporate raiders, was in a standoff with a waitress in a cheap uniform, and he knew with absolute certainty that she was not bluffing. She would let him walk away. He slowly extended a hand across the table. "You have a deal, Ms. Reed," he said. "Be outside in 10 minutes. A car will be waiting." Annalise looked at his outstretched hand, but didn't take it. "I have to finish my shift, Mr. Harrington," she said. "I will not leave my colleagues short-staffed. My shift ends at 11 p.m. The car can wait." With that, she picked up her notepad, turned and walked away from the table, leaving the billionaire sitting alone in the alcove, utterly and completely stunned. She had not only won the negotiation, she had set the terms of her own surrender, and in doing so had claimed total victory. True to his word, a sleek black sedan was waiting at the curb when Annalise stepped out of Trattoria Valeriano at precisely 11:05 p.m. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, held the door open for her without a word. The smell of worn dishcloths and cleaning chemicals was instantly replaced by the scent of expensive leather and polished wood. As the car pulled silently into the stream of New York traffic, Annalise watched the familiar gritty streets of her neighborhood blur past the tinted window. It felt less like a ride and more like being abducted into another dimension. They didn't go to an office. Instead, the car purred to a stop outside the Beaumont, a hotel so exclusive it didn't bother with a sign. The lobby was a hushed cathedral of marble and gold, where the air itself seemed to have been filtered for pedigree. Harrington was waiting for her in a sprawling penthouse suite that was larger than her entire apartment building floor. Genevieve and Robert were there, looking uncomfortable amidst the opulent furniture, their briefcases open on a glass coffee table. If Harrington was surprised by her insistence on finishing her shift, he didn't show it. He was all business. "Ms. Reed." "Good. Get her some coffee." He barked at no one in particular. An aide materialized from a side room and scurried off. "We have 3 hours to get you up to speed," Harrington said, gesturing to a seat that probably cost more than her car. "Genevieve will walk you through the key players. Robert has the financials. I want you to absorb all of it. I don't just want to know what they say. I want you to know what they're thinking before they do." For the next 3 hours, Annalise was subjected to a fire hose of information. She wasn't treated as a colleague, but as a high-performance piece of equipment being calibrated for a mission. Genevieve, with a newfound respect that bordered on reverence, explained the complex family dynamics of Voss Kruger, the deep-seated rivalries between the CEO, Herr Schmidt, and his ambitious nephew, a young buck named Thomas. Robert, still clearly intimidated, stumbled through the labyrinthine financial models, pointing out the sticking points in the valuation. Annalise listened. She didn't just listen. She absorbed. She asked sharp, incisive questions that cut through the corporate jargon. "This patent for the synaptic interface," she asked, pointing to a file. "It's listed as a secondary asset, but the R&D budget for it is disproportionately high. Why?" Robert fumbled with his papers. "It's a side project. High risk, long term." "No." Annalise said, her eyes scanning the German patent filings. "It's the entire future of their company. The rest of this," she waved a hand over the main portfolio, "is legacy tech. It's profitable, but it's a dead end. Herr Schmidt is an old man, but he isn't a fool. He's not selling his company. He's selling its past to fund its future. This synaptic patent is his real child. You haven't made a single mention of it in your primary offer." Harrington, who had been pacing by the window overlooking the glittering city, stopped. He turned and looked at her. Genevieve stared at the file, then back at Annalise, a slow realization dawning on her face. Annalise was right. They had been so focused on acquiring Voss Kruger's current revenue streams that they had fundamentally misunderstood the old man's endgame. At 2 a.m., Harrington dismissed his team. "Go, get some sleep. Be at the office at 7. When they were alone, he regarded her with a new, unsettling intensity. "Where did you learn to do that?" "It's just reading," Annalise said, taking a sip of the now cold coffee. "Most people scan for what they want to see. You just have to look for the inconsistencies. The story is always in what people try to hide, not what they show you." He gestured around the suite. "A room has been prepared for you here. There's a wardrobe. My assistant has provided a selection of clothes for the meeting tomorrow. Your bank transfer will be processed at 7 a.m. I expect it to clear by 8. Annalise nodded. The room he led her to was not a room. It was another suite, complete with a marble bathroom, a king-sized bed with an absurd number of pillows and a walk-in closet. Inside the closet hung several outfits of brutally expensive, minimalist corporate wear. Tailored suits, silk blouses, Italian leather shoes. A note from the assistant indicated they were in her size. The efficiency was terrifying. She closed the door and leaned against it, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the past few hours. She felt a wave of dizzying vertigo. Last night, she had been debating whether to spend her last $20 on laundry or groceries. Tonight, she was sleeping in a bed that cost more than her annual income. It was a gilded cage, and she wasn't sure if she was the guest or the prisoner. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city spread out below her, a breathtaking carpet of lights. It was the city she had lived in her entire life, but she was seeing it from a perspective she never thought possible. From up here, the streets looked clean. The chaos seemed orderly. The struggles of the millions of people below were invisible. It was Conrad Harrington's view, a world seen from a great insulating height. For a moment, she felt a pang of fear. She was a trespasser in this world, but then the anger returned, cold and clarifying. She wasn't a trespasser. She had earned her place here tonight, not with money or connections, but with the one thing they couldn't buy, and had almost missed entirely her mind. She looked at the clothes hanging in the closet. They were a costume, a uniform for a different kind of service. She would wear them. She would play the part. But she would not forget the feel of her worn-out waitress shoes or the smell of the trattoria's kitchen. She would walk into that boardroom tomorrow, not as a new member of their world, but as a representative of her own, a world where intelligence was the only true currency. And she was about to cash in. The headquarters of Harrington Dynamics was a monument to brutalist architecture and corporate power. It sliced into the Manhattan skyline like a shard of obsidian. Annalise, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that felt both foreign and armor-like, walked beside Harrington into the main conference room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. On one side of a vast mahogany table sat Harrington Genevieve Robert and a team of impassive lawyers. On the other sat Herr Schmidt, his nephew Thomas, and their own legal team. Herr Schmidt was exactly as Annalise had pictured him, old world with a stern face, a ramrod-straight posture, and eyes that held a deep, weary intelligence. His nephew Thomas was the opposite, restless, dressed in a more modern, tailored suit, his eyes constantly darting to his phone. The meeting began in German. Harrington's official translator, a prim man named Peterson, sat slightly behind the main group, rendering the formal stilted pleasantries into English with technical accuracy, but zero nuance. Annalise sat beside Harrington, silent and observant, a notepad in front of her, on which she made no notes. Her job was to listen between the words. For the first hour, the negotiation was a slow, grinding affair. They postured, they debated valuation clauses, they argued over shareholder dilution. Harrington, following the new strategy, made a point of praising Schmidt's legacy, framing the merger as a preservation of his life's work. Schmidt seemed to respond well to this, his posture softening slightly. But he wouldn't budge on the final price. He was holding firm at a figure that was 15% higher than Harrington's top offer. "It is a matter of respect," Schmidt's voice rumbled, as translated by Peterson. "Respect for the work, for the employees, for the name of Voss Kruger." Anneliese knew it was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. She could hear the subtle hesitation in his voice. She watched the way Thomas shifted in his chair every time the valuation was mentioned, a flicker of impatience crossing his features. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a short break for coffee, the two sides stood and stretched. Most of the conversation died down, but Schmidt and his nephew moved to the far side of the room, near the window, speaking in low tones. They clearly assumed no one on Harrington's side could understand them if they spoke casually. They were wrong. Thomas was agitated. He spoke quickly, his voice a low, frustrated hiss. He wasn't speaking German. He was speaking Italian, a language of his mother's side of the family, a language he likely used for private, sensitive conversations. "Uncle, this is ridiculous. Volkov will give us our price. Why are we wasting time with this arrogant American?" Anneliese felt a jolt, as if she'd touched a live wire. Volkov. Nikolai Volkov. The Russian industrialist was Harrington's fiercest competitor in the European market. If he was involved, Herr Schmidt's reply was a weary sigh, also in Italian. "Patience, Thomas. Volkov is a wolf. Harrington's offer is cleaner, a strategic merger. Volkov's offer is a hostile takeover with massive debt. We are only using his offer to drive up Harrington's price. But don't push too hard. If the American walks away, we're stuck with the devil." It was all there, the entire charade laid bare in a few whispered sentences. There was another offer, but it was a poisoned chalice. Schmidt didn't want to take Volkov's deal. He was using it as a ghost bid to inflate his company's value. He was bluffing, playing a high-stakes game of poker with a billion-dollar pot. And Harrington was about to fold. Anneliese's heart hammered in her chest. This was the critical piece of intelligence, the key that unlocked the entire negotiation. Peterson, the official translator, was obliviously sipping his coffee. Genevieve and Robert were reviewing their notes. Harrington was staring out the window, his jaw tight with frustration, assuming the Germans were having a private family discussion. Anneliese had a choice. She could remain a passive instrument, a human listening device, and relay this information later. Or she could become an active player in the game. It was a terrifying risk. Intervening directly would shatter all protocol. It would mean exposing her full capabilities and stepping far beyond the bounds of the role she'd been hired for. She looked at Harrington. She remembered the contempt in his eyes the night before the casual cruelty. But she also remembered the flash of respect when she had stood up to him. He was arrogant and ruthless, but he was not stupid. He listened to good data. She picked up a pen. On the clean white page of her notepad, she scribbled 4 short lines, her handwriting neat and urgent. "They have another offer. Nikolai Volkov. It's a bluff. Schmidt hates the offer. He's using it to drive you up. He's more scared of you walking away than you are. Call him on it. Now." She tore the sheet from the pad, folded it once, and stood up. She walked calmly over to Harrington, who turned as she approached, an impatient question in his eyes. "Your coffee, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice perfectly level, using the pretense to get close. She held out the folded note. He looked at the note, then at her. He saw the intensity in her eyes, the absolute certainty. He took the paper. As he unfolded it and read the words, Anneliese watched the color drain from his face. His eyes widened, first in shock, then in dawning comprehension, and finally in a cold, predatory fury. He understood. He had been played. He looked across the room at Herr Schmidt, who was just turning from the window. Then he looked back at Anneliese, not at a waitress, not at a translator, but at the most valuable weapon in his arsenal. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The game had just changed. The coffee break ended. Everyone returned to the table, the atmosphere thick with the pretense of cordiality. Herr Schmidt took his seat, his face a placid mask of a man holding a winning hand. Harrington sat down opposite him. The note from Anneliese was gone, but its contents had clearly rewired his entire demeanor. The frustration was gone, replaced by an unnerving, almost cheerful calm. "Gentlemen," Harrington began, his voice smooth as silk, completely ignoring the previous topic of discussion. "I was just thinking about the market. It's a fascinating ecosystem, isn't it, full of predators?" Peterson, the translator, dutifully rendered the words into German. Herr Schmidt looked puzzled by the non sequitur. Harrington continued, a faint smile on his lips. "You have your sharks like us Americans, I suppose. We move fast, we bite hard. Then you have your bears." He paused, letting his eyes drift pointedly towards the east-facing window. "Big lumbering crush everything they embrace. They have a certain Russian relentlessness to them." Across the table, Anneliese saw Thomas flinch. It was a micro-expression, a flicker of panic in his eyes, but it was there. Herr Schmidt's face remained impassive, but a new tension appeared in his shoulders. "My offer," Harrington said, his voice hardening, "is what it is. It is a fair strategic valuation designed to build a future. It is not an auction price. I am not in the business of bidding wars, especially when the other bidder's primary business model involves asset stripping and saddling companies with unsustainable debt." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Schmidt's. "So let me be perfectly clear. My final offer is on the table. It is generous and it is honest. And it expires in the next 5 minutes. If you feel you have a better, more respectful offer from someone like, say, Nikolai Volkov," he said the name with deliberate, venomous precision, "then I strongly suggest you take it. In fact, I'll wish you the best of luck. You will certainly need it." The silence in the room was absolute. It was as if a grenade had been rolled onto the center of the table. Peterson, the translator, finished relaying the ultimatum, his voice trembling, slightly aware that he was transmitting a declaration of war. Herr Schmidt's composure finally cracked. His face, which had been a stony mask, seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. He shot a furious glare at his nephew, who shrank in his seat, his face ashen. The bluff had been called in the most brutal public way possible. They had nowhere to run. Anneliese sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the table. She could feel the heat of Harrington's stare, the shock from Genevieve, the utter confusion from Robert. She had passed him the note, and he had trusted it. He had bet his entire billion-dollar merger on the word of the waitress he had tried to humiliate less than 24 hours earlier. The 5 minutes crept by, each second stretching into an eternity. The German lawyers whispered furiously to each other. Schmidt sat rigid, his knuckles white, where he gripped the arms of his chair. He was trapped. If he accepted now, he would lose face and a significant amount of money from his inflated asking price. If he refused, he'd be left with Volkov's predatory offer, which he never wanted in the first place, and his company's future would be in jeopardy. Harrington didn't say another word. He simply sat back, radiating an aura of absolute confidence, and watched the old man crumble. Finally, with a deep, shuddering sigh of defeat, Herr Schmidt spoke. His voice was a hoarse whisper in German. We have a deal." A wave of relief washed over Harrington's side of the table. His lawyers began shuffling papers, their professional smiles snapping back into place. Genevieve let out a breath she seemed to have been holding all morning and shot Annalise a look of pure, unadulterated awe. Harrington stood up and extended his hand to Schmidt. The handshake was brief, a formality sealing a surrender, not a partnership. As the room erupted into a controlled chaos of lawyers conferring and assistants rushing in with documents, Harrington walked around the table. He ignored his cheering team. He ignored the defeated Germans. He walked directly to Annalise. He stood before her for a moment, saying nothing. The titan of industry and the woman who had, just hours before, been clearing his plates. He looked down at her, and for the first time she saw no arrogance, no condescension in his eyes. She saw only a deep, profound, and grudging respect. "Let's go for a walk," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't an order either. It was an invitation, an acknowledgement that her work here was not finished, but had in fact only just begun. Conrad Harrington did not lead Annalise back to an office. Instead, he took her up to a private elevator, which opened onto a rooftop garden, hidden atop the monolithic skyscraper. The roar of the city below was a distant hum. Here, amidst meticulously pruned juniper trees and slate-grey planters, the world felt still. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Harrington walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over his kingdom of glass and steel. Annalise stood back, giving him space, sensing he was processing more than just a business victory. Finally, he turned to face her. The wind whipped at his tailored suit, but he seemed not to notice. "I had a deal fail 3 years ago," he said, his voice devoid of its usual force, carrying a note of raw honesty. "A major acquisition in Japan. Biggest deal of my career. It fell apart at the final hour. My team told me it was about the price. The translators told me the negotiation was proceeding as expected." He paused, his gaze distant. "It wasn't until 6 months later that I found out the real reason. My lead negotiator had made a joke, a simple American-style icebreaker. But the way it was translated, the cultural context that was lost, it was taken as a grave insult, a sign of disrespect to their chairman. They never recovered from it. They walked away. It cost the company $2 billion and set us back 5 years. He looked directly at Annalise, his eyes holding a painful clarity. "It wasn't the money that bothered me. It was the blindness. I was in the room and I couldn't see what was happening. I was deaf to what was really being said. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable, that ignorant again. And then last night, I walked into a restaurant and proved to myself that I had learned absolutely nothing." It was the closest thing to an apology he was capable of giving, and they both knew it. "You didn't just give me information today, Ms. Reed," he continued, walking closer. "You gave me sight. You gave me hearing. You prevented me from making the same mistake all over again." He stopped in front of her. "The $87,000 is in your account. Your 1-day contract is fulfilled. You can walk away right now, go back to your life, and never see me again." Annalise met his gaze unflinching. "Is that what you want?" A slow smile spread across Harrington's face. "No. What I want is to offer you a job, not as a translator. The world is full of people who can swap words from one language to another. I have a building full of them. What I need is someone who understands the lexicon of intent, of pride, of deception. Someone who can read the silence between the words." He extended his hand, not for a handshake, but as an open gesture. "I'm creating a new position, Head of International Communications and Strategy. You'll report directly to me. You'll be in every major negotiation, every international meeting. Your job will be to be my eyes and ears to advise me to ensure we are never blind again. Your starting salary will be $350,000 a year, plus bonuses. We will also fund the completion of your degree at any university you choose." Annalise stared at him, the sheer scale of the offer taking a moment to land. It wasn't just a job. It was a different life, a different future. It was the future she had been working toward before her world had fallen apart. He wasn't just offering her money. He was offering her back the life that had been stolen from her. She thought of the trattoria of the ache in her feet after a long shift of the condescending smiles and the dismissive waves. She thought of her tiny apartment, of the debt notices that felt like a physical weight on her chest. Then she looked at Harrington. She saw a man who was powerful, flawed, and arrogant, but who had also, when confronted with undeniable truth, been willing to listen, willing to trust, willing to change. Working for him would be a challenge, a battle of wills every single day. But she was tired of fighting for survival. She was ready to fight for a seat at the table. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her own hand and shook his. His grip was firm, solid. A deal being struck. "I have one condition," she said, her voice clear and strong. Harrington raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. You will learn to say please and thank you," she said, in at least 5 languages. For a moment he looked stunned. Then a deep, genuine laugh escaped him, a sound so unexpected it seemed to startle the birds from the trees. "Deal, Ms. Reed," he said, still smiling. "Deal." As they stood there on the roof of the world high above the city, Annalise Reed was no longer a waitress. The uniform was gone, replaced by a suit of armor she had earned. Her future was no longer a question of surviving the next shift, but of navigating the globe. She had walked into a restaurant the night before, invisible, and had walked out indispensable, proving that the most powerful language in the world isn't English or German or French, but the courage to speak your own worth. The story of Annalise Reed and Conrad Harrington is a powerful reminder that true value is often hidden in plain sight. It's a testament to the fact that intelligence, dignity, and strength cannot be measured by the uniform someone wears or the job they perform. We all have hidden talents, untapped potential, waiting for a moment to shine. Annalise didn't just translate languages. She translated her own worth into a language a powerful man had no choice but to understand. Her journey from the service industry to the executive suite wasn't about luck. It was about seizing a single moment of disrespect and turning it into a lifetime of opportunity. If you are inspired by Annalise's courage and believe that everyone deserves the chance to be seen for who they truly are, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next video on incredible real-life stories where the underestimated rise to the top.